couple things I'll share while they're passing out the handouts, and then we'll get a little more focused. This morning, as I was praying about the day, I just kept flashing back to this embarrassing time in my history. And I thought, how did I get from there to here? And I can't shake it, so I'm going to share it with you. I was started as a teacher, was out of the public school classroom for, 20 years. Went back at age, I don't know what it was, probably age 50. And had not been in public school classroom, okay? So this was my assignment. I had at-risk 7th grade, 7th through 12th grade, actually, math and English. And my core group, were 7th grade boys. There were 8 of them in that class, and they had gone through 3 teachers in quick succession. The one just prior to me, they had called an ambulance. She thought she was having a heart attack. She was under such stress. She was a young woman. And so I started in January, in mid-year, with this group of boys. And there was just this boldness. They had no clue what they were getting when they got me. But those guys thought they controlled the class, and they had. And anyway, time went on, and at the end of the story was really good. They all graduated from high school, and Rod and I had the privilege of mentoring some of them. Some became Christians, and there was just a real prayer focus over them. So our relationship grew strong over the years. It took time because they were pretty much, this group was an abandoned bunch, and they needed to believe in themselves and believe they could succeed. But they did, and they thrived. But there was one particularly horrible day when I was first starting, and you don't turn your back on them. It was we were actually in a trailer-type classroom, and there were these 8 kids and 7th graders, and I mean, I didn't turn my back ever on them. And so anytime there was anything to explain, and I always kept moving, so it's real hard for me to stand still even now. But I had this overhead, and I had the marker out, and I was going over this math problem with them. And I had accidentally picked up the permanent transparency marker, and I know now we use smart boards and all that, but then we had transparencies. So I had this permanent marker, and I was waving my hands around, and I took this thing and went right down the front of my white blouse. And they looked at me. Before that, it was like anything goes. And they looked at me, and I looked at them, and not a single one of them laughed. They didn't snicker, nothing. And they were just like, they knew, we've crossed the line. But great bunch of guys. And then the contrast between that and the setting where the Lord has me now is just too funny. And I was just a little fearful this morning, even though I'm real comfortable with the topic and it's like, so God, where's this coming from? And you know what I think it is? I think in the body of Christ, there has been so much hype over food storage and so much fear surrounding this topic that's what I was picking up on. Just this whole thing of like, I don't know what it is, because it shouldn't be. And I'm really hopeful by the end of the day, you'll have much clearer understanding about how to take care of your family, how to take care of your neighbor, and just really how simple it can be. There does not need to be fear surrounding it. So anyway, if I start throwing pens and clickers, and please forgive me. And it's hard for me to stand still. So good morning. Rod and I often have this conversation about living in the now and later. He has deep spiritual understanding about just biblical principles and life, and he's a student of the Word and a historian. So he'll go through these world events and line them all up, and I'll be sitting at the other end of the couch, and I'll say, okay, so how now shall we live? In other words, what does that change? What do we do with that? Be practical with me. How does that change our lifestyle? And we are always back and forth with balancing that spiritual and the physical. And that's where we find ourselves. And I know the Lord has wisdom in that for us. We've got to live in the now moment. We've got to. We've got to appreciate those around us. We've got to live in faithfulness every single day. as well as planning for the future. So, and you know, sometimes this whole thing about living in the now moment, we misinterpret that. We somehow think it's all about me or all about what I want, and it's not. It's all about God and how our lives glorify Him. And I believe it means living with a gratitude, well, an attitude of gratefulness is a better way to say it, an appreciation of the now moment. So I'm grateful for the now, and I'm trusting that the Lord will lead me to the tomorrow. And I'm also grateful for all God's provided for us and appreciating every single person He's put in our path. Faithful, it means being faithful to all He's called us to do. And it explains or describes a life lived without regrets. It's living in a way that prepares us for the later because we're not so entangled with non-essentials. Life is simpler. Life is more focused. And then that accusation that we are somehow doomsayers or narrowly minded, focused around chaotic events, it just won't stick. We'll be the most peaceful, grateful, focused, and generous people anywhere. By planning ahead, we're putting ourselves in position to care for others. And it's called being in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. We believe in and practice purposeful, peaceful, practical preparedness. It's peaceful because we know the source of peace, and it's not about what we have or don't have. It's purposeful, indicating that we have a plan, and we're working that plan. And it's practical. It has to work. Your situation may be very different from mine. For example, you know, I think of the time when you have young children and just the overwhelmingness of the time constraints there, or the person that's working full time and they're thinking, how in the world am I going to deal with all these foods, and thinking about that. Well, you may not be able to do it every day, but you could do it one day a week. And eventually the planning will shorten the time in preparation. And it has to be proactive. Rod recently had a conversation with a doctor friend who's very committed to missions. And his connection, this preparedness thing, was with Y2K. And he said, it just kind of sounds selfish to me. But later, as we were talking about that and why people tend to go that way with it, is we don't at all. We don't consider it selfish. We actually think of it the other way. We think it's being proactive. Because okay, so the doctors always say, you know, eat right, exercise. Well, okay, that's being proactive. If we plan ahead in these areas, in health issues, why not plan ahead in other areas of our lives? Because people who are proactive are in a position to help. Stocking up's not the same as hoarding at all. We are putting ourselves in a place to care for others. So, boils down to this. Am I going to depend on someone else to take care of me, or am I going to position myself to care for others? Where we are now, I'm speaking for Rod and I, is the outflow of hearts filled with gratefulness for what God has done in us. We've been at this lifestyle for so long that I have trouble even separating it enough to articulate it. It's kind of like great-grandma's pie recipe, you know, and you ask her how she made it, and she says, well, it's a pinch of this, you know, a handful of that, and you almost have to come alongside to learn how they've done it or how she's done it. So that's my invitation to you, and with as much openness and honesty as I can come up with, I will tell you the successes we've had, the failures we've had, what I would have done differently. And my hope is by the end of the day that you will come out of here, but you're going to hear perspective. Okay, my perspective is ground level working up. You're going to also hear from Terry, and he thinks big picture. He thinks cities, okay? So we're going to mesh somewhere in the middle, and I think you're going to enjoy that. I think you'll come away with a whole new perspective. So, let's move this thing ahead. Am I doing that correctly? All right, here's where I throw the marker. Is it me? Okay, there we go. Thank you. These are your choices. All right, these need to go more quickly. All right, this is what happens if you refuse to plan. You end up eating things like ramen noodles, Spam, peanut butter, canned soups, peanut butter, diet soda, crackers, and peanut butter. You know, it's funny, the last place we shared this one couple, actually the ones we were staying with, they told us this story later, when they had gone down and looked at what they had stored, their two primary items were ramen noodles and peanut butter. So, you know, it works, but just know that that's what you're going to be eating. Okay, and then if you let someone else do your planning, this may be what you end up with. MRE, TVP, MRE, freeze-dried Neapolitan ice cream. Have you seen it? Buckets, 45-pound buckets of wheat. That's like the 6-gallon bucket or 5-gallon bucket. Powdered milk, sugar, and salt. Okay, making you hungry? This, I think, is our more realistic thing. If you plan with basic ingredients, supplemented with fresh things, hopefully from your garden, possibly a neighbor's garden, plan and store what you eat. These are some possible menu ideas. The pasta primavera, which could be using any kind of fresh vegetables in it, so it would vary with the season. Bread, any kind of bread, dipped in the seasoned olive oil with your fresh herbs from your garden, hopefully. Flatbreads with hummus. And if you're doing emergency cooking, probably you're not going to be doing a lot of the yeast-raised breads so much, just because they're just kind of hard to pull off if you did not have a working oven. You can do it, it just takes a lot of fuel. So flatbreads will become much more doable and practical. Black bean salad, burrito with refried beans, oatmeal with cinnamon and raisins, pancakes with peanut butter and syrup. We did use our peanut butter. Skillet granola, which is a stir-fried type granola in a cast iron skillet. Beans and rice, of course, beans and rice are a classic. So see, those are normal foods. And none of them take exotic ingredients. They can all be prepared with things that you might store. And I mentioned earlier that our strategy is peaceful, purposeful, practical preparedness. During normal, non-emergency times, lack of planning may simply result in wasted time, money, frustration, inconvenience. But in a widespread emergency, shortage, or natural disaster, adequate planning and preparation can save lives. And that's true whether you're an emergency responder or a single parent home with your young children. Our just-in-time delivery system has made us very vulnerable. And it's not just the just-in-time delivery system, it's the way we purchase is kind of a just-in-time system, very vulnerable. Along with that convenience has come dependence. And at first, it seems like you're saving time and energy because you can do other things and you can just work it into your day. You can run by and pick this up and fix that quickly. But in the long run, it does make us much more dependent. We've lost the understanding of what foods are seasonal. Basic skills are being lost to generations. For example, many of us saw grandparents garden, even though we've not been in a place to garden ourselves, but a lot of the children or grandchildren have no idea where to start. And then our lives have become so cluttered and busy that many families don't even sit down and eat a meal together anymore. Families have become disconnected and relationships more fragile than ever. And there has been research actually done on this, that the most stable families are those that eat dinner together at least so many evenings a week. Now, I don't recommend doing the preparations around a particular event because events come and go. We can't predict accurately which ones will impact us or to the extent to which they'll impact us. And we can't prepare for everything. And we just can't. And one of the arguments I hear so often is, I could never save enough food. You know, eventually I'm going to run out of food and we're going to starve anyway, so what's the point? Well, my response to that is of course, if God does not multiply food, if he isn't our protector, I mean, we're not going to survive anyway. That's not the point. We're offering our loaves and fishes, and we're saying, Lord, we're going to be faithful with what you've given us, and we're just trusting you to multiply that. So again, It's peaceful. It's not fear-based. It's purposeful. We're moving forward incrementally, and it's practical. It also works in our current surroundings. All right, so now that I've hopefully convinced you, and you guys don't need convincing of the need, you may be asking, where do I start? So this is a little picture of our basement. Again, you saw this with the water. What we did is we got these shelves at Sam's, or Costco has them too, and we loaded them to see if we could fit like a 2-week emergency supply on these shelves, just so people could have a visual of it, and we could. And then we unloaded them, and then we put some water products out and took a picture. And then on this, I did some emergency short-term things and just spread them out a little bit so that you could see they're just normal foods. This is what I recommend that people do. Start with what you eat. Make a list of what your family eats over a 2-week period of time. Your general, particularly evening meals, maybe breakfast and evening meals. And if you will notice, those rotate. We are pretty much creatures of habit. We do some variations, but there are meals that rotate throughout, somewhat seasonally, more soups probably in the winter, and there's some change, but you'll get a pattern from that. And then take a careful look at those things and see which things are adaptable for emergency situations, which things don't use quite so much fuel, or which things you could do over a grill or a campfire or a camp stove or whatever your optional cooking method might be. And really hone in on those, and then look at the ingredients and think about, okay, could I substitute some things? Could I use some things that maybe are more storable here, or could I enhance the nutrition by adding a certain thing to it? So really look at your list, okay? And then after you've looked at that list, also think about the storage requirements, and then adjust it. Okay, so then start increasing the amounts of your storable pantry items so you have at least a 3-week supply. And there's that thing back and forth. Some say, the emergency planners will say 2 weeks, and we always go more because we want to have enough to share. I mean, that's just how we do it. So we kind of think in terms of 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, and take it out that way. All right, so these are items that are very storable items, that are recognizable items, I think, that would fit into that 3-week particularly. Just some canned soups. Notice the manual can opener up there, absolutely essential. Somebody mentioned that yesterday. Just plain old bagged pasta, maybe pasta sauce. I don't normally buy canned chili like that, but you know what, in an emergency, I could sure work with that and make something from it. So that would be a protein source. Grape nuts, oatmeal, raisins, the jar there are home dehydrated apples. Of course, we have our French press coffee maker because, comfort foods. Then at one emergency planning meeting we were out at, the man had so many practical ideas, but one of his was any kind of pancake mix that you just stir water into, because he said it's comfortable for children. You can cook pancakes anywhere on anything, and then you can beef them up with extra stir-ins. You can put peanut butter on them. You can make sandwiches out of them. You can do anything with it. So I thought, what a great idea. And this Krusty's pancake mix was one of those Sam's things, and we haul it out to Colorado for our big family vacation every year, and haul it back and haul it out. And that one's been going on 3 years now. And it's still fine. I tested it, and the stuff, even though the expiration date is up, it works fine. And we'll haul it out there again this year and use it again, hopefully use it up. The other thing that emergency manager mentioned that relates with water that I just thought was such wisdom, Rod was talking about those 2-liter bottles of water, doing it that way. He said if you have a chest freezer that isn't full, to line the bottom of it with those and allowing room for expansion. And then you have this layer of frozen water. And of course, the freezer, if it wasn't full, is more efficient if it's full. But then if you have a power outage, it works like an ice chest, and then you can also use the water as it melts. So I thought that was a pretty ingenious idea. Okay, so we've got some basic foods. And then after that, Go back. This is where you start getting into some of the other plant-type planning. Then purchase 3 days' worth of like go bag type stuff. And this is what you always hear about, like the MREs or the meal bars or anything that requires absolutely no preparation that you would be comfortable with. It could be freeze-dried packets, beef jerky, hard candies are a good thing. I imagine that in the presentation on Go Bags this afternoon, Scott will have some good ideas too on things that they would include in it. But that's typically what you would use. And again, if it's something you keep in your car, rotate. We were talking about that yesterday on the way home. We have backpacks that we keep in our, in our car in the trunk that with emergency type stuff in it, because we live in the country and everywhere we go is far. But the food items and water we really don't put in it. We just keep those in our car, in our glove box, and we use them and rotate them all the time. We just make sure that before we go anywhere, we've restocked, because they do get old. Our boys used to make fun of us because it was like, yep, there's mom and dad and their go bags and their stale granola bars. It's like a story of our lives, because we'd forget to rotate them. All right, then 3 weeks supply, basic pantry, just stock up when things are on sale, pretty simple foods. Then you've got your 3 days supply of your emergency, really emergency stuff. Only after those things are done do I recommend looking any further than that. Because those things everybody can do, everybody should do. To me, that's a no-brainer. And that's just another basement picture. There's a Mountain House packet there. You see those with the dehydrated and freeze-dried Cliff Bars. The soup mixes, the Shoreline soup mix we found in our grocery store. And I just double package those and keep them too and rotate them. The canned meats are another thing that didn't show up earlier. So all those are possible for that 3-day, 3-week type thinking. All right, then only after that do we start talking long-term storage. And what are your options for long-term storage? Well, the MRE is what everybody talks about. And honestly, I think that's probably the most limited thing, because they are complete meals, but they really don't store that long. They're pretty bulky, even though they're lightweight, and they're expensive. But they are convenient. So like if you're thinking go bag or you have the right situation for them, you may want some. They, according to the U.S. Army, the shelf life varies dramatically with temperature changes. For example, when stored at 60 degrees, the shelf life is more than 10 years. But when stored at 100 degrees, it's less than 2 years. Now, that doesn't mean it's inedible or will make you sick, but it's lost nutrition and quality. So you could still eat it, but you may not prefer to. That whole temperature thing, and we'll hit that again, and Terry will talk about that too, I'm sure. 70 degrees seems to be the standard. Like when they talk about variations of 10 degrees, they're talking about below 70, above 70. Preferably, you never store anything above 70, but I realize you have challenges here with that. So that's a thing with the more convenient type of long-term storage foods would be an issue. Now, when you get the hardcore storage things, and I talk hardcore things that you just can't ruin, like whole wheat or raw white rice, they will store just anywhere. But some of these other things really do have a tighter shelf life. Okay, another option is the freeze-dried foods. Those things have improved dramatically over the last years. Terry has generously, and I'm so grateful for it, had those cans available for you to try out there. The main suppliers that you'll hear about are Alpine Air, Mountain House, and what was the other one? Oh, Provident Pantry is another one. And essentially, now there are variations in the mixes, but like if you get freeze-dried strawberries, they're going to be freeze-dried strawberries pretty much whoever you get them from, okay? So if you sample the freeze-dried strawberries, they're a pretty typical product, and they are wonderful. The fruits are great. The vegetables, you'll notice there's a difference between the freeze-dried and the dehydrated, and I love having that side by side out there because you can look at, Okay, this is what green beans that are dehydrated look like. These are green beans that are freeze-dried. And if you were just a consumer looking at a price list, you'd go, well, they're about the same price. Why wouldn't I want freeze-dried? But if you examine them and look at the serving listing on the side of the can, you get about twice as many servings out of the dehydrated. So it's just a great opportunity to really look carefully at some of those items. The other advantage of I'll tell you how freeze drying is done in case you don't know. Commercially, they flash freeze. You can't do this at home, okay? It's a commercial product. But they flash freeze in a vacuum chamber that reaches -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Then they apply a low-level heat. Ice crystals evaporate then without going back to liquid. So that removes about 98% of the moisture, prevents spoilage, and makes that long-term storage possible. Now, the beauty of them is there's very little preparation. You just add water. I mean, that really is a wonderful thing. No heater is required. Some things are much more enjoyable if they're warm, but you don't have to. They are more expensive, usually, than the dehydrated. Now, again, there are more and more things that are freeze-dried on the market. One thing, and I don't know that I have notes on this, so while I'm thinking about it, I want to tell you, when you see the mixture-type meals, the freeze-dried, usually the meats in them are true meats that are freeze-dried. The dehydrated mixtures, it's usually the TVP, the texture vegetable protein. So just kind of make note of that. So you'll see quite a marked increase in cost of the freeze-dried meal things. I'm trying to think of a good example. I'll just say beef stew. It's probably really freeze-dried beef, where if you get a beef stew that's a dehydrated, and this is true no matter what company, okay? This is across the board. There could be an exception I'm not aware of, but of all that I've compared, that's what I've seen. In the dehydrated, it would be the texture vegetable protein, but it would be less expensive, okay? Now, to the dehydrated, well, wait a minute. Before freeze-dried, I mentioned the primary suppliers. The foods you can get either in the pouches, and you saw some out there, the Mountain House pouches that are freeze-dried mixes. You just add water. The pouches don't last as long. They recommend 7 years, sometimes 10 years. And again, it depends on your storage conditions. The cans, they will say up to 25, 30 years. You'll see a lot of variation on the recommendations. If they're trying to sell you something, it's always 30. But if you really pin them down, they'll say it depends on your storage conditions. And once again, it's not going to hurt you at the end. You will just simply lose nutritional value and quality. So keep that in mind, too. All right, after you open the contents, again, there's variation in what they recommend on how quickly you use it. Some things don't matter so much. You just reseal them, store them in a cool location. A number 10 can will provide 10 to 13 cups of reconstituted foods, which is that 22 half-cup servings. Okay, I'm going to come back to that serving thing in a second. Examples of foods that you'll find that are usually freeze-dried are the meats, main dishes, just a few vegetables. Most of the vegetables are dehydrated. And then fruits. Fruits are great, freeze-dried. Okay, serving size, just so I don't get away from this, and I may come back to it. Pay attention to that, too, because when you read, like when you're looking on a website or in a catalog and you read, okay, I have 22 servings in this we'll say beef stew, all right? No, you wouldn't have it in that, because for fruits and vegetables, it's half-cup servings. For the main dishes, they give it in 1-cup servings, so they would probably say 10 to 12 servings, actually, on that. But when you test that, you think about this. Rod's my guinea pig, and so he graciously allows me to test these things on him. So I did one of the potato soup mixes, because, you know, all the companies have potato soup mixes. In fact, one time I had 4 different ones we prepared and tried to see how much difference there was between them. Okay, so I pour up his serving of potato soup in a mug. So 1 cup, 8 ounce, 1 cup. Not a huge coffee cup mug of 12 ounce or 16 or whatever some of those are, but an 8 ounce. And he looked at it and he thought, this is dinner? Okay, now think about that if you're in an emergency. Now, if you're just holed up in you don't have blizzards here, but whatever you would have for 3 days, it wouldn't matter so much. You just want something warm, and, you know, like at home, we'd sit in front of the wood stove and sip our potato soup, and we'd be fine. But if you are into an emergency and you're expending energy, which a lot of it is physical at that point, that 1 cup of potato soup is not going to last your body very long. So really, when they advertise that, okay, for this price you get 2,222 servings of whatever, with this many calories a day, and that can be very misleading. Those servings could be talking about just, a half-cup serving of vegetables here and a 1-cup serving of potato soup there or whatever. So keep that in mind. Okay, the dehydrated. This is something you can either do at home or you can purchase. The commercial dehydration uses high heat to bake out up to 97% of the moisture. That's why those things keep so well. It's the least expensive, and it's used for everything from dry mixes to vegetables. Now, the disadvantage is that most foods have to be reconstituted with water, and so you've got to have that storage. And again, with freeze-dried, you would also need to store some water, but dehydrated particularly, and usually cooked, which requires heat. Another thing to watch out for, often they will say 10 minutes. Well, 10 minutes often equates to crunchy. I found that 20 to 25 minutes is much more typical, even of things like the potato soup, even that kind of thing. A lot of that might depend, too, on how fresh it is. If you've ever stored beans and cooked beans that are older, you can cook them a long time. So keep that in mind, too. The cooking times might be different and equate longer cooking time with more fuel. So something else for you to think about. I know this, I'm just throwing out all these things to watch out for, and you're thinking, okay, so where is that going? I will reassure you that it will come together at the end. Now, on dehydration, some things we normally eat are like raisins, dehydrated, beef jerky, fruit leathers. None of those require cooking, obviously, and they're things you always eat in a dehydrated form. And they're great storage items. Now, you can also dehydrate food at home with an electric dehydrator, or here you could probably use the solar dehydrators. At home, it's so humid at the only time of year we could use it that it's even a trick to get things packaged before they reabsorb the humidity. So, I'm not sure what it's like here in July and August, but I'm thinking maybe you would have some months that you could pull it off with an outdoor thing. And I remember my grandmother talking about, and I witnessed this, doing apple slices on the tin roof of their barn. And apples, of course, unless they mold, it's not going to be a problem. And I'm sure she knew at what point she could save them and how to save them from there. But in our area, we can't really do outdoor. So we have like electric dehydrators, and they're inexpensive. I mean, you can get good ones around $100. And if you're a person that has never done like home food preservation, and you're like, ugh, everybody talks about canning, I'm not sure I can pull that off, I'm not sure I want to, I'm not sure I have the supplies to do that, then I always tell people the place I recommend you start is home dehydration, and then vacuum seal it. And like you can take small quantities of whatever excess you have in your garden, or even something you've gotten at a farmer's market or grocery store that is on sale, and dehydrate it, and then vacuum seal it. And like vacuum seal bags, I realize are expensive, but most of the vacuum sealers have those jar attachments where you can just do the canning jar flats that are not expensive, and you can reuse the jars. So you just hook it up to that, pull the air out, and then keep it in a dark place, preferably a cool place. And the only thing you have to watch out for is mold. So like if you haven't gotten it dry enough and you open it and see mold on it, obviously you're not going to eat it. But it's a safe product. They say use it. I've read charts on some of those things that say use it within 2 to 3 weeks. I'm thinking, what? Because I've had fruit leathers for a couple years that have been perfectly fine. Fruit leather is wonderful for home dehydration too. Just like, applesauce, unsweetened, just blended up or ground up apples and any fruit you want to put with them, like half and half, and then dehydrated is just a delightful product. But I've kept them much longer. Meats you would have to be more careful of if you do the jerkies in this area. I'm not as familiar with the storage life on those. Now we keep things in the freezer or refrigerator if we're concerned about long-term storage. If we did not have refrigeration, then that would be another issue, and those things would need to be eaten more quickly. All right, and then, of course, wet pack, and that's just canned stuff. Grocery store canned, and Terry actually has some that he's brought just specifically to remind people. That's a very valid long-term storage. Now, it depends on how you define long-term, but most people, when they're talking long-term, they're thinking a year. Well, most of those canned things will last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The expiration date on them generally is around 2 years, but everything we have seen has said they go way beyond that if they're taken care of, and the can's not been compromised in any way. Nobody will put that in print because of liability issues, but you will be a good judge of that and which foods you would feel comfortable with keeping longer. But still, 1 to 2 years, my goodness, if you have space, you can store a lot of canned things for that period of time, and they're things you normally eat. And like canned fruits and vegetables, the juices count for liquid for your water. Or if you're making soups and things, you can use those. You can mix in some dried as extenders. So don't discount those normal things that you eat on a regular basis. They're inexpensive. They're familiar. And you know something else that kind of surprised me is I thought that dehydrated would mean huge space savings. And you know, it's not as much as you would think, and there will be a slide that'll come up again, so you'll see this just to refresh it. But you know, and I think now they're 13 or 14 ounces. They used to be the 1 pound cans, the small cans of vegetables and fruits. Generally, it takes about 8 of those to equal the number 10 gallon size can that you see out there of a dehydrated product. And it takes about 8 of those to equal a bucket. So if you remember that rule of 8, it'll get you a long way as far as like computing. If you're thinking, okay, I'm figuring servings, and I know how long it takes for my family to eat this, so how much would I need? That is a practical application for that. And then the packaged foods or mixes from the grocery store. Like I mentioned on our basement shelves, those Shoreline chili mix is excellent, to the point I've started using it a lot. Now, read the back of it. Read your labels, because some of them are high in sodium. They have MSG. They have other additives that you may not want. So watch that. If they're packaged mixes, they're made with a shelf life. So see, there's something in them to extend that shelf life. So pay attention to that. You can also do your own mixes, which is a great idea too. The one thing you need to remember, though, that any mix is subject to the storage time of its least storable ingredient, okay? So like if I put brown rice in my soup mix, brown rice does not store as well, unfortunately, because it's much healthier for you, but it doesn't. Generally, they say 9 months on it, 6 to 9 months. But if you keep it in the refrigerator, it depends on your storage conditions. Here, it would be a challenge. But if you have a soup mix with the brown rice in it, you're not going to get your 3 or 4 or 5 year lifespan out of it. So keep that in mind too. The other thing is anytime you add a layer of protection to something, you extend the shelf life. So like if you have, say, soup mixes or something, and or the bags of pasta, and I think I heard Daniel mention this. He uses the 1 pound things and puts them down in a bucket. Absolutely do that. That will double your shelf life. Now, you may not get top quality for 20, 25, 30 years doing that, because you would need to pull out more oxygen and have a little more tight controls on it. You wouldn't want to be in and out of it all the time. But for most things, you're going to be fine with that. And that's something families can do on a very simple, usable basis. All right, then let's look briefly at packaging, and Terry's going to hit that some too, but again, I think it's going to help you. You're going to get my perspective, and you're going to get big picture perspective meeting in the middle with that. The different options, the buckets, you see those buckets? They, for certain things, are hands down, I think, the best way to store. Wheat stores indefinitely. White rice is another thing. And you can get in and out of that bucket as long as you don't allow moisture in, and your product will last. Okay, or moisture or pests or anything. If you're careful with it, your product will last. And it's cheaper for them to package it in the larger container. For those kinds of items, it's perfect. The one beef I had against them, well, there are two. One is they are so heavy. that even in the awkwardness of them, if you're short, even if you can lift 45 or 50 pounds, they're just the way you have to lift them and work with them is a problem. So you need a place where you can access them. The other thing that has really made them wonderful is the Gamma lids. And again, Daniel had his hands full when he was showing you that yesterday, but I was like, those things are my favorite. And there's some out here you can play with, but you take that lower ring off, put it on your bucket, and it stays there as long as you're using that product. You spin that other ring on. They come in colors, so you can color code your products. And then when you're done with that bucket, you can just pop that thing off and reuse it again. So they're a little pricey, but they're reusable. And then you don't have to mess with broken fingernails and unchristian-like attitudes and all of that from opening buckets. Do be aware that there is a food grade and a non-food grade bucket. Most white buckets are okay. But like if you're sourcing buckets from somewhere and doing your own, watch for that. You know, if you're buying them commercially, it's not going to be a problem. Another thing I want to mention here is the Mylar bags. You may have seen those, and we flew, and I didn't bring a sample to show you, and I'm not sure there's one out there. I don't know. You know, they're a new thing, and most of my food has a lot of what I'm using now, I started working and storing in the mid-90s, and I'm still using it, so that gives you an idea. We didn't have Mylar bags then. I just had the buckets. Now, we're talking long-term storage, so we're like talking wheat, because I grind wheat and make bread and rice and beans, the real basic things, okay? They're not like mixtures. But they have stored well. I've never had an issue with it without a Mylar bag. And in fact, when we lived in our farmhouse, we stored them in an outbuilding. They were up on pallets, and there was never any rodent issues. But as far as like not moisture extremes, temperature extremes, it was extreme. And then we were fortunate enough to get a new house with a nice basement, and now they're cool and dark and where they should be. But my goodness, we're talking, you know, from 1996, I think, is the oldest. And I'm still using that Wheat Montana hard white prairie gold wheat, which is a delightful product. And it's fine, perfectly fine. And I'm still using beans and still using rice from those. And I have the Gamma lids on, and I, you know, seal them, because 2 people just don't go through this stuff very fast. So, you know, my history without Mylar bags is very good. Now, Terry's the same way. He's like, I don't see the point in them. The people who are promoting them, and they are another layer of protection. You can line your bucket, because plastic does have some permeability. So it's an extra layer of protection. Mylar is actually made of polyester, in case you're curious about that. And you've seen them. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? It's like the Mylar balloon stuff, only it's heavier. It's not that same thing, but it's similar. Heavier product, and it's kind of shiny-looking stuff. And now, the thing where it's nice is if you're doing your own packaging. It's an easy product to work with. You put it inside the bucket or the can, depending on the size you're working with, and you just iron the seam on it, and you have a good sealed product. So in that case, you may want to look at it. And when I was developing lists, like recommendation lists, that's a hard thing to do, because you don't know each person's situation. But if I were purchasing like a cracked grain for long-term storage, I would consider the Mylar, because it's another layer of protection. Anytime you compromise that grain kernel and crack it or roll it or whatever you're going to do to it, it will not last as long, will not store as long. So then the extra layer of protection might be necessary. So we can talk more about that later if you have questions too. I'm just again, I almost stressed out over this whole thing of when they kept telling me, okay, we really want you to put together a list. And Daniel specifically asked for a shorter term list that we're going to go through. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what they have accessible. I don't know what they like to eat. I don't know, large family, small family, all those different scenarios that go into it. So I've come up with something that I think is it's generic, but it's balanced, all right? But if you have specific ideas or thoughts, please share them, because that's some of the best ideas is what we get from one another, and there'll be more opportunity for that in this smaller group this afternoon. Okay, cans, the number 10 cans are what you'll see most often, probably. I've done that too. We had, as a food co-op, we had one of those canners, and we did our own dry products. We used oxygen absorbers in them, and again, those things kept fine too. Cans to do it yourself now are pretty expensive. I mean, when I was pricing it out, I still had the canner, but it was going to be like $2 per can to can them by the time I got the cans and the lids and the plastic lids and the oxygen absorbers. And I was like, for that, I'm going to let somebody else can it for me. Maybe that's because I'm still not, doing for a large family now, and maybe because I'm lazy, I don't know. But do watch that, all those different aspects of it, because what may seem like you're getting a good price on something, after you figure your packaging in, depending on who your supplier is, it may be cheaper to purchase it already canned. They're easy to store. You can stack those in the back of a closet or under a bed or all sorts of places. And our 3-month supply is all the 1 gallon or smaller cans because of that. The other things you can do for larger quantities, and Terry will talk about the IBC containers, those great big ones out there. And depending if your calling is to a city, I mean, that may be what you need to do. Pouches just don't last as long. They're convenient, they're small, but they don't last as long. Oh, wait a minute, I think I went the wrong way. I did. See, I'm not good at this. All right, how much do I store? That's probably the question you've been asking more than any other. And it's the question that I don't think anybody does a very good job answering. It's one of the things that propelled me into researching this, because I was getting such conflicting information. I had some background in nutrition. I had a lot of background in food planning and menu planning and all that sort of thing. And I was thinking, some of these just do not make sense. And I think one of the things that sets Prepare the Way apart from other suppliers is that we go that step beyond to help you analyze what's out there and then help you to use, what you've actually got stored. So a long time ago, our grandparents did this. They did season to season. So this isn't rocket science, okay? But somehow it has become really confusing. The people who've done the most research are the Mormons. And they have, the earliest thing I can find with that was like a book written in the 1960s where they referred to the Mormon Four. Have you heard of that? Okay, pretty comical when you think about how we eat compared to what it would be like working with those. And you'll see that slide in just a second. But generally, the research has come from the Mormons. And they all have certain things in common. You'll see categories when you look at them. And even in the really prepared foods, the mixes, a lot of times they'll still sort them out into these categories. They look different than our basic food groups because they're stored foods. But again, you'll find those similarities. We have the grains, which could be anything in that grain category, and we'll get to more of that later. You have the beans and legumes category, and those combined with grains you'll get a protein source. So those are two very key groups there. You have the fats and oils, which encompasses everything from peanut butter to salad dressings to the regular oils, coconut oil or whatever, your olive oil or whatever you're saving. Then you have that whole gamut of sweeteners. And then sometimes they'll list baking essentials, not always. Sometimes they'll just give like something in those 4 top groups or 5 top groups, and that's it. They'll say you need 300 pounds of this, 100 pounds of this, and then you take it from there. Okay, again, our ancestors did this. They had root cellars, and they did home canning. And when you read accounts sometimes of the pioneer days, they talked about early spring being the starving times or the hungry times because the things in their root cellars were being used up or were not storing any longer, storing well. And then home canning really didn't get started until during World War II, I believe. Rod's grandmother would tell stories. She was one of the people the Extension Office hired and gave a canner so that she could go teach people how to do home canning, and that was during World War II. So it hasn't been that long. This isn't root cellar country, but sometimes you'll hear people talking like romantically, oh, not romantically, nostalgically, I'm not sure the word you would use. If I had a root cellar, you know, I could store this and that. And when you're reading, you know, some of the food storage things, well, you know, we had a root cellar at our farmhouse, and it was so damp all the time that anything we put in there sprouted. We couldn't keep canned goods in there because they rusted. I mean, it was basically a tornado shelter. And that was it. And we put new shelves in it. We fixed it all, drained it. And it still was not effective. Only in certain climates, certain soil conditions can you pull that off. So don't lament the fact you don't have a root cellar. You can still adapt areas in your home for that. And then the home canning, you want cool and dry and dark. So you certainly don't want the moisture with that. Okay, this is a picture of the Mormon 4. I pulled this out of my storage just to show you what it looks like. And these are the amounts, and this is truly what they had. The wheat, they had 300 pounds of wheat. Okay, I want you to picture your meal planning here. This is your 1 year storage, your set, okay? 300 pounds of meat, 85 pounds of powdered milk, 60 pounds of sugar or honey, and obviously those aren't proportional, they're just samples, and 6 pounds of salt. Now, in that particular book, it was called Passport to Survival, I believe, Esther Dickey, that was the person whose name you often see linked to all this. She developed a lot of these things. I have her book at home, and I was looking through some of those options she had with wheat, and of course we would go, okay, bread, crackers, flatbreads, tortillas, sprouts, you know, things that we're used to eating. Well, they made the gluten from the wheat into meat products, candy products. I mean, unbelievable variety. I've not yet taken the time to test any of those. It's not top on my list, but anyway, it can be done. All right, now they've updated it, and this generally is what you'll see with recommendations from many of those books. They'll say, and you might want to jot these numbers down. What I gave you, I'll tell you about your handouts. In a minute, we're going to look at the extremes of what companies recommend. The first sample you've got is the most basic one of the most basic I've seen. The second sample you have is kind of the most extreme, so that you get an idea of the parameters we're working under. But within those, if you're looking at what companies recommend, these are the general requirements, and I don't know that I've listed them specifically that way on anything. So if you just kind of, for your own reference, they'll usually say, this is an average. They vary it a little bit now between man, woman, adult, child, but this is an average. They say around 300 pounds of whole grains. And then the beans, legumes, it ranges everywhere from 34 to 60 to 90. And the variation I've seen in that, I think, has to do with how many other vegetables and fruits you have stored. So because notice there's no category on here for fruits and vegetables. So if you have other freeze-dried dehydrated fruits and vegetables, you could go the lower end on the beans and legumes. But if you're getting your primary source from there, you would want to go the higher end. Fats and oils, they say around 26 pounds a year. Powdered milk, dairy, and eggs. This is another one where I just see a huge variation. Part of it depends on if they sort out the eggs. Part of it, I think, depends on if it's powdered milk or reconstituted milk, weight-wise. But they'll say anywhere from 16 to 60 plus. So in our guidelines, we've used the 60 just because you can use the powdered milks for cheeses, for cream soups, for just so many other things, and you would need that calcium source. And then sweeteners, 60 pounds. So, you know, the sweeteners are right up there with the other. Okay, so let's think about what you eat and compare. That complete protein ratio, grains to beans, is 3 to 1, so it's 3 part grains to 1 part beans. And again, you want as much variety in there as you can get. But keep that in mind, and that's why often you'll see those combinations, rice and beans. If you really want to get wisdom in cooking with basic foods, look at how missionaries listen to their stories, the ones who have been in third world countries or countries that are suffering a lot of poverty. They cook very basically, and they have some great ideas. A lot of the flatbreads, and then the combinations, like our cornbread and beans, or the rice and beans, all of those things that we even eat without realizing we're getting a protein source from that. And the thing on fats and oils, too, I always think the recommendations look high. But if you are in an emergency situation, you have more caloric needs and you need more fats and oils. So keep that in mind, too. Then, on this type of list, you need a grinder for the grains. And if you're getting a grinder, if you already have a grinder, and we might talk about that some this afternoon, too, your preferred kinds, but do not buy junk. Oh my goodness. We have an electric grinder that we bought used that we've used for, I don't know, 20 some years. And it's been great. It's a one they don't make anymore. So when I was thinking, okay, for emergency situation, I really need a hand grinder, I bought one. Then I thought, I'm not going to use it all the time. This will work. And I don't know if I should tell you the brand or not. I will, because it's not their best. It's the Lehman's Best, and I don't even know. I think it's pretty much the same, and I'm trying to think of the price. I don't know, $150 maybe, something like that. Anyway, I never used it. So a bunch of us got our grinders out and tested them one night. And you'll also read, well, if you don't have a grinder, get a can and a pipe, and you can pound the grain. Okay, so we got a can, and we not only got a pipe, we got one of those steel fence post drivers, and that's really pounding, and oh my goodness, it was awful. And then we tried these cheap little grinders, and you can get a coarse grain, I mean, you'll work for it, but you can get it, but I just thought, this is ridiculous. I was really disappointed in what we had. So my word of wisdom to you, if you have one of those grinders you've not tried, try it. And then I just bit the bullet and bought the Country Living Grain Mill. They're just there may be other good ones out there in that range, but they're well recognized as a good one. And plus, I wanted the ability to be able to grind beans and all those things with them too. My grinder that I use, my electric grinder, is a stone grinder. So you have to be careful what you put in it because it gums up the stones. It makes a wonderful fine flour for wheat flour for bread, but it doesn't grind all those other things without some concern. So that would be something I would recommend to you, that you get something you can grind the corn and the beans for. Because with those beans, using bean flour is a great way to add nutrition and protein. The other thing I would include in these, because, I mean, my goodness, would you not get sick of that without spices or other things to enhance your meals? So always include things like that. And then even things like some comfort foods, nuts, some of the things that don't store as long, but that are a good source of quick energy, you would need to include. So when you see those lists, definitely they're not complete. Okay, so now we're going to look at these plans. Whoa, I will learn this by the time I'm done. All right, the comparisons on them, and I've looked at them till I'm dizzy. And you know what? I'm thinking, okay, would you like to just stand and stretch your legs before we look at them? I think you should, because from now on, we're going to be looking at plans, and we're going to be kind of comparing. It's kind of a different subject, and you need to stretch. 2 hours is too long for anybody to sit. Actually, in that class of 7th grade boys, 15 minutes was too long for anybody to sit. Yeah, someone just asked the question, that list that they have, the 300 pounds of grain, et cetera, the generally accepted recommendations, that's one person for 1 year. Okay, as you find your places again, pull out those handouts because that's what we're going to be looking at. And I'll also say while you're getting seated, please stop me anytime during the day. If there's some thought that I've not completed or something you have seen or found to be confusing, and if I've run across it, I'll certainly share anything I have, because there are some differing opinions on this, and I've really tried to stick with what is generally accepted, things I'm confident that I can, walk away and sleep at night. All right, so let's say you are one of those that has purchased a one-year plan. You've gone to some website and they've said, we'll take care of you, or you've heard some advertisement, don't worry about your family, buy this, buy that, and you've purchased it. Prices could have ranged anywhere from $800 to $4,000. And what are you getting? Are you getting peace of mind? Maybe. Are you getting nutrition? Maybe. Most importantly, are you truly prepared? And that is the key. We're going to quickly examine the two extremes I told you about, and then you'll have a better understanding of how companies develop their recommendations. And then during this session, I'll look at the Prepare the Way recommendations for short-term, I call it short-term, long-term storage, the 3-month. And then in the next session this afternoon, and I probably won't get to it this morning, this afternoon, we'll look at more of a 1-year, what that could look like, although you do have it in your packet. And then we'll look at some more specifics and quantity cooking and that kind of thing this afternoon. Okay, so let's start with the most basic. Sample number 1 on your sheet. Now, I'm not going to tell where these came from. It doesn't really matter because you're going to see these type recommendations in more than one place. So, that isn't really the issue. That one, if you take a look, and I need to find mine here, sample 1, you have 13 6-gallon buckets of all sorts of grains. Well, not really all sorts of grains, are there? We have wheat, red and white. By the way, if you aren't sure of this red and white wheat thing, nutritionally they're the same. Red wheat is just a little stronger wheaty flavor. So if you're tricking your family into whole wheat, you want to start with white. But, it may not matter. They're about the same price. When they first, and I'm not sure if they claim to be the first one to come out with it. I'm not sure they really were. Back in around maybe 1990, Wheat Montana started that Prairie Gold, and now it's everywhere. So I don't think it's all theirs. But that was that white winter wheat, and it was really, really good stuff. And again, now you can find it. In our area, we can buy it in the grocery stores, the Bronze Chief and Prairie Gold white. Okay, and then white rice. It's white rice, not brown, because white rice stores indefinitely. Brown rice does not. So you'll always see some form of white rice. The regular non-instant white rice like this lasts, much, much longer. Okay, then they offer the quick rolled oats. Now with oats, you can get whole grain or, oat groats. They're actually chunk oats that have the hull removed. You can do that. And they're almost like a steel-cut oat. So if you're going to cook it for oatmeal, you may want to do that. Usually in the plans, you'll find the quick rolled oats because that's what people are familiar with. You can also get the old-fashioned rolled oats. I would never buy the oats mixes, because you can mix your own. You can take these quick rolled oats and stir in your own little bit of brown sugar and powdered milk and hot water, and you've got your quick oats. Pinto beans are always included in the plans because they're so versatile and they're cheap. Then they include a small white bean. I have found these critters to be takes a long time to cook them. They got stale really fast. And the only time I would do them, let's see, are they the navy beans? Anybody familiar with them? Are these the navy? Yeah. Okay, what's the name of the little white bean? Is it the Great Northern? I get them confused because I really don't care for either one of them, so I don't use them very much. I'll tell you why, and it has to do with that flavor thing. But the advantage, it's good to have some because if you're grinding beans and putting them in your flour, a white bean is preferable. So because that reddish color isn't very pretty. And then black beans, and that's one of my favorites, and then instant milk. But this is somebody else's list, 13 6-gallon buckets, and that's what they have in it. Okay, then they include 6 number 10 cans. And they have shortening powder for your fats and oils. They have a huge can of baking powder, huge can of baking soda, salt, and sugar. Okay, baking soda has tons of uses, definitely. Store lots and lots of baking soda. That's pretty over the top on baking powder, but it works. And then they have the smaller, these 2.5 cans are like a 28 ounce, like a large fruit can that you would buy in the grocery store. They have beef and chicken bouillon and yeast. Well, they actually just 3 packages of yeast. And a lid remover. A lid remover is essential to get that lid off the first time when they're sealed. I didn't mention that earlier. But this is your very basic thing, and it's cheap. Got some great ideas for dinner? All right, so let's look at the other extreme. Okay, so let's say you want the ready-to-eat freeze-dried foods from a preparedness company, 1-year supply. All right, the price is on this, and you might want to make note on this just so you have it for your own. At the point of this writing, it was $3,799.95. It's probably more now just because this was probably 6 months ago. So probably close to $4,000. One person. That's plan number 2. Oh, yes. You know what? I fixed one thing and I didn't fix the other. I first had 4 samples, and I took 2 of them out just because I'd added some other things. And this was originally sample 4, and I changed it on yours, and I didn't change on the PowerPoint. So, yes, thank you. Sample 2. And this is 1 person for 1 year, or 4 people for 3 months. It's advertised as having a rich gourmet taste. And also to prepare, simply add water, wait 10 minutes. No sarcasm in my voice. Note the 12 cans of crackers and 24 cans of drink mix. That's what I really want to call your attention to. Look at that. Okay, we'll start at the top. Main dishes. Everything is pre-mixed. Now, it is true. You just add water. You would warm them just to make them palatable, but you don't have to cook them. Since it's freeze-dried, you can, and this price, it's going to be freeze-dried meats. There won't be much meat in them. And again, the whole thing will get back to meat and protein, but in case we don't go there, you might start thinking for long term when you're talking about meat, it's more in terms of seasoning than it is. You're not going to have a steak on your plate. I mean, that's just not realistic unless you're a hunter and can pull it off that way. But from stored foods, think of your meats as seasonings. So that's how it would be in this case, but they would actually be meats. They would be freeze-dried. Now, I'm not sure additive-wise what these look like. I didn't have access to the labels on these. I think these were Mountain House in this package. And I don't know if you have done any looking around for purchasing products, but these type things, even in this company where I got this from, they are not available now because Mountain House has been so backlogged, and the government did this huge purchase back in late February, and they have not caught up. So it'll say this item temporarily unavailable, unavailable, unavailable. And it's usually these mixtures in the number 10 cans. So if you stay away from those particular things, there are other products that are out there available. But this particular thing you won't see. Okay, so I'm not going to go through each one. You can see some of your choices. 6 cans of each. Okay, so let's think about this. This is freeze-dried. Each can for a main dish is probably going to be about 10 to 11 1-cup servings. Okay, so if you're a hungry family and there are 4 of you, 4 or 5 of you, you're going to probably eat a can at a time. So it's not going to be a problem of opening and closing and storage. You'll eat it pretty quickly. All right, then you have these drink mixes. The reason they put drink mixes in, I think, is just so people will drink the water. Because the water, you know, to take care of an off taste in water. But I'm like, why not have a decent purifier and drink the water? We just aren't big on these drink mix things. But, you know, if that's what it takes for your family to drink enough fluids, then definitely invest in it. But I would still say, instead of buying like orange drink mix, it's going to be the same thing as Tang. I mean, just go buy, you know, your lemonade mix or Tang mix or whatever and do it that way, rather than paying someone to package that for you. Then the breakfast, they have the egg mixes there, and they have 12 cans of granola with blueberries. So that granola with blueberries, they're dried blueberries or freeze-dried blueberries in a granola mix. But like that skillet granola that I mentioned earlier, and it's in this little cookbook I put together, but it's just like oatmeal and brown sugar and butter or butter powder that you could use, and then you toast it over a campfire and stir in your own dehydrated fruit that's been reconstituted. And why would you need to purchase cans of granola? Because those cans of granola, once you open them, they're going to be gone fast. You think about a box of cereal. You know, those cans aren't very big. So that's probably not real good use of funds there either. Now, then the snack things, the freeze-dried strawberries, all the freeze-dried fruits are great. And if you've not tested those out there, be sure and do that during your break or lunch. They're wonderful. And then Pilot crackers, 12 cans. So again, I call those things padding. Most of the plans have those, so watch for that kind of thing. And then they have the side dishes. They have the super sweet corn, garden sweet peas, and then 6 cans of instant white rice. So see, the more expensive items are balanced with those less expensive items. So pay attention to that when you're purchasing. Okay, I'm looking to make sure I've mentioned everything on those. Oh, I'll just share with you another storage plan I recently saw. It was a 1 year for, I wrote down here 4 people for 1 year, 2 meals a day. But that doesn't really matter. The variety is what I'm wanting you to catch. There were only 4 items in it, and it was $1,229. But it was millet, 6-gallon buckets of millet, 6-gallon buckets of rolled oats, 6-gallon buckets, well, they're 4 millet, 6 rolled oats, 6-gallon buckets of a hearty soup blend, and then 1 6-gallon bucket of powdered whole milk. Yeah. And you know, I'm like, okay, now millet is great. And for people who are gluten intolerant or who have celiac disease, it is something they can digest. So definitely millet, and millet is inexpensive, and definitely it's something to consider for one of your grains. But to build everything around millet, I just don't think is balanced unless that's your only option. It's much better to have a variety of grains. The other thing, well, the oats, I don't have a problem with oats. You know, maybe it's because we eat oatmeal all the time, and I just think it's versatile and cheap and good. The Hearty Soup Blend is another good product. That you'll also see it called ABC Soup Mix, and I don't, you know, if we'd driven, I would have had my little sample, and it may be out there too. But it's like a mixture of, it has brown rice or white rice, depending. It has a little ABC pasta in it. It has green split peas, yellow split peas, lentils, I think is the other thing in it. So it's a real tasty thing to stir into a vegetable soup, and it has a lot of heartiness to it. So it's excellent. But 6 6-gallon containers, you're going to be eating that morning, noon, and night. And then 1 6-gallon of powdered whole milk. And this is another question I have, because everything I see says you do non-fat milk, because the whole milk, the fat in it's what makes it rancid. So that's why you will almost always see that non-fat milk thing. And this says whole milk, and I went back and double-checked it. So I know this company, and they are, I know the people in charge. They're wonderful people, and in some equipment areas, They are fabulous. They really know their stuff. I just happen to think in the food area, someone has given them recommendations that really aren't very practical. And I'm thinking they'll probably do some revising over time because they'll be hearing that from people. Okay, so anybody overwhelmed yet? It really is, honestly. As much as I've looked at this, and I'll see some flashy new company, and I start looking at it, and I go, oh my goodness, they've got it all figured out. And then I read it, and I compare, and it's all about the same. People kind of group them differently, they label them differently, but if you know what you're looking for and what your family eats, there's no mystery in it at all. Okay, once again, let's go back to basics. Stock up on non-perishables you already eat, the stuff you buy every week. Stock up when you see it on sale. And then think in terms of, and you're going to get my perspective here, and you may or may not agree with this. I think it's more important to learn to cook with ingredients than prepackaged meals. I'm just not, you can get so much more variety if you've got a well-stocked supply of basic products than you can with like turkey tetrazzini, 6 cans, and then rotating to potato soup, that kind of thing. So I really am sold on that. The other thing I'm sold on is gardening. You can do so much with a little piece of garden. And Terry's going to talk about gardening later too, but I want you to know that I'm just absolutely committed to that, whether it's lettuce in a pot or we've been sharing Swiss chard stories with our hosts. And at home, kale is my new favorite green. Those greens just add sustenance and nutrition to grain meals that you just can't get in a soup mix. So if you have the basic bouillon type or a beef base or chicken base or something, and you have to build a good broth, and then you have like that hearty soup mix, and then you have some greens from your garden or from a pot on your patio, you can have a nutritious meal, and there's not much expense involved in it. Oops, I keep going the wrong way, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's review this briefly before we look at the other recommendations. Always look at your water and fuel availability. When we, in our house, we made sure we have propane instead of natural gas where we live. But we made sure that our range, our kitchen range is a propane range, just simply so we could cook. And then so some long-term things we've done in heating with wood and some things like that are just lifestyle things that may not work for you, but there are so many options out there. There really, really are. That's one thing when the world starts waking up to things, people start getting things into production, and there are products that you can choose from. So, and a grill will do it. You can go a long way on a grill, propane or charcoal. And then think, too, about whether you'll evacuate or shelter in place. Where's the Lord stirring your heart? We, admittedly, are really going to be in trouble if we have to evacuate because our place is set up for people. And that's just where that's where the Lord has put our hearts. And so we continually have to look at, all right, if we had to, even to go to the basement during a tornado, we went down for a tornado warning a year ago, didn't have shoes on. That is not smart. So just some of those things, we're weak too. I mean, we've developed some of this, but there are other areas we've got a long way to go. Consider your family members. Do you have any infants, elderly people, allergies, specific medical needs? We've talked about the equipment that's necessary. We've talked about storage space conditions, your budget. I talked about those number 10 cans. Always include some comfort foods because there are times when you're stressed and you just need to sit down with that bowl of hot soup or that cup of hot tea or whatever it is, hot chocolate or whatever it is for you. So that reminds me, people will always ask me, how long does chocolate store? Because chocolate's kind of important in our household, and my answer is always, I don't know, it never lasts long enough. The other thing is practice. Cook from your food storage once a week, and I do definitely want you to walk away with that. Whatever you have stored, don't think of it as, okay, it's there, it's done, forget about it. Incorporate it once a week. That's where you're going to learn what things you like that you want more of, what things do not work for your family, what things you're going to feed to the chickens. That's where you learn. And it may not be practical, and I really don't think it is practical for people to cook from it every day unless you're unemployed and you have time and can really need to work from that. That would be a different scenario. But for most people, that doesn't work. But one day a week, you could do it, and you can learn a lot from that one day a week. The other thing I want you to absolutely come away with is think about nutrient-dense foods. I was putting up those things earlier on ramen noodles and Spam and TVP and all that. But I really am serious about that. Occasionally, it's not going to hurt you, but you sure don't want to try to live on that. You need to preserve your health when you're under stress and when you're in an emergency, and you need to look at everything you're putting in your body even more carefully than you do now as far as what nutritional impact it's going to have. Okay, and then this is that rule of 8 I mentioned earlier, but if you didn't get that down, it might help you. Your serving sizes, a number 10 can of beef stroganoff will provide about 10 1-cup servings. And then the rule of 8, it takes about 8 number 10 cans to equal a bucket, and about 8 wet pack pound cans of fruit or vegetables equal a number 10 can. I think I have a picture. Yeah, the small can, about 8 of those for the number 10 can and about 8 of those for the bucket. Okay, my person is leaving there and I need my next PowerPoint up. Would you mind doing that before and I'll go back here while he's getting it ready because I want the 3-month recommendation chart there. Okay, go back. Oh, what happened? Sorry. Was that the one you wanted? The number 8, okay. Pardon? You know, that's a good question. I'm thinking it's 6 gallon because 6 gallon is what all my things are in. So I think when I was figuring that out, that's what I was going by. And again, these are general guidelines. It's going to vary depending on what the product is. This is more usually, yes. Some dehydrated too, though. He's asking if that number 10 can, if that's a freeze-dried or dehydrated. No, there's no water in it. So it is a dried product, yes. Yeah, the number 8, the little can is, let me go to that next one. That little can is just, I'm thinking of this in your serving sizes as you're planning, okay? When you count how many servings, that small can, they'll say 2 or 2.5 servings. Okay, then they'll jump up to that number 10 can and, they'll go around, depends on what's in it, 20 or 11 for half-cup servings, and then you go to the bucket. And the transition from can to bucket, I know is dried foods because if you're like pouring wheat, like from can to bucket, it's about 8 cans for 1 bucket. So I'm pretty sure that's a 6-gallon bucket. The 5-gallon bucket thing is a newer deal with some of the dehydrated foods now are coming in 5-gallon buckets, and they are easier to handle, but depending on price, you're losing a gallon. Okay, is that perfectly unclear? All right, let's look at the next chart. Thank you for waiting, and we'll switch to that. It's that 3-month prepare the way thing. And in this, I'm going to look at specifically thinking through, and this is what Daniel had asked me to do, is because he had heard me talk about the 1 year, what that looks like, and he said, okay, dial it down. What's it look like for people who are wanting 3 months? And I think he even in the process was asking, what's it look like for people who want 1 month? But I'll tell you what, you can't go to 1 month, because if you're doing dehydrated, freeze-dried foods, unless you're planning to do little packets, the quantity size, it just doesn't compute. You would have such little variety to make it practical for 1 month that 3 month is the more reasonable amount. Is that making sense? If you're just going 1 month, just stock up on your grocery store stuff. I mean, really. If you're wanting more long-term, that's when you would go for 3 month. Okay, are we ready with getting there? So this plan, this 3 month that you have there, we can go on and take a look at it, is 3 months for one person. And then I went back and, I don't know if I changed it on yours, on mine I did. It's actually 3 weeks for a family of 4. So you can, you know, it's a pretty workable amount. Now, okay. Thank you, that's it, perfect. Okay. All right, this is what I really wanted you to see. Which is best, 3 month supply, 1 year supply? Because this is going to come up, and this is something you need to think through in your head very seriously before you start purchasing. These are the differences you're going to see. When you're thinking long-term, 1 year supply, you're thinking it's going to be larger spaces required for storage. That's a no-brainer. You'll use buckets for some things, because some things store easily in buckets and it's just more cost productive to store them in buckets, like wheat, rice. But you will be using whole grains. So if you do not want to be cooking your wheat kernels for 45 minutes or however long to really soften them up, you would need to have a grinder of some sort. Okay, so you've got a grinder need here. More flexibility, but you need that piece of equipment. And then the items are chosen for long-term storage. And it is less expensive per item because it's in the most practical storage unit, size unit. So like on yours, you have, in your handout, you have that first 3 month thing that's all on one page, and then you have the 1 year thing that's on 2 pages that I'll talk about in the afternoon session more. But that, when I'm thinking through, that is the way I thought that through. The other thing I did is I looked at variety and tried to build in as much variety and flexibility as possible. Okay, so when you're looking at the 3 month supply, you're like, hey, I'm in an apartment, I'm in transition, I really can't go long term. Okay, this 3 month supply is all number 10 cans, and actually it's 42 number 10 cans, which is like 7 of those boxes of 6. And then it's, I think it was 8 of the smaller 2.5 cans, because like baking powder and stuff, you don't need a huge big can of baking powder. Some of those things are just more practical in smaller sizes. So we're talking equivalent of about 8 of those just nicely stackable, storable boxes of most of them are number 10 cans, okay? So very easy to store, and you could probably picture in your head where you could put it. That would be an advantage of a 3 month supply. No grain grinder required. Everything's cracked or rolled. Items are chosen for shorter cooking times. So when you see the rice, you'll see like parboiled rice. Well, you know, you're losing some nutritional value anytime you do that, but shorter cooking times, because we're assuming you're in a place where your options are more limited. And per meal, it's going to be more expensive because it's a little more processed, okay? But it will be, and it does have a shorter storage time, because anytime you compromise the grain or you grind something or roll something, you're shortening your storage time. However, in certain situations, it may be the best option. So again, comparing 1 year, 3 month, this is how 3 month looks. Okay, the next thing on it, let's look at the grains specifically. Ooh, I can't even see that one back there. All right, it would be around 75 pounds assorted. And these were the ones that I listed. There are lots of other possibilities in that category. There's a 9-grain cracked cereal we didn't talk about. Pearled barley is a great soup addition. Pancake mix. I put white flour in there because if you're in this situation, you might want options with white flour. Cream of wheat. You'll see something in some of the listings called Germaid. Have you seen that? That's like cream of wheat. So it's a cereal. Pastas. You know, why not add your pastas in there? Popcorn, popcorn you can pop or grind. So it's a good storage thing too. So those are some of your grain possibilities. All right. Beans, legumes, these would be your protein sources. So I lumped meats in there too. I put down pinto beans, black beans, lentils. Lentils are one of those unpopular little items that people just don't use much, but they're wonderful. I mean, they're cheap because I think people don't pay attention to them. But you can sprout them. Those things sprout in a couple days. And they're good for you. They cook quickly, and I just think they're a great option. And I wrote down taco TVP because you cannot get a freeze-dried number 10 cans of meats run around, I'm thinking around $40, somewhere in that range, depending on what it is. But again, you could do that. You could also just purchase canned chicken, salmon, that kind of thing from, grocery store or Sam's or Costco. Oops, sorry. Milk and dairy, around 15 pounds. I put down instant non-fat milk. There's the cheese powder, dehydrated and freeze-dried cheese. I'm glad this came up. Out there, take a look at that because the dehydrated powder is like the macaroni and cheese packets. That's that kind of powder. But the freeze-dried cheeses, they're expensive. I mean, we're talking, some of them are around $50. But they are a fabulous product. So if cheese is important to you, it's a very real type cheese. But no, there's a huge difference between dehydrated and freeze-dried cheeses anywhere. Fats and oils. You can choose from margarine powder, butter powder, shortening powder, depending on how your standard is for fats. You can buy locally peanut butter, nuts, oils. Honestly, in this situation, I would buy locally olive oil, coconut oil, do that kind of thing, and just recycle them. But if you wanted a powder that was truly more storable, you could go that route. Sweeteners. Honey stores indefinitely, good for you, great option. White and brown sugar, maple syrup, just whatever is important for you for a sweetener. See, this isn't hard. They make it into some, like overwhelming thing like, oh, you got to have this and this and this or you'll starve. No, you won't. And then fruits and vegetables. And there is not a standard on these, so we've just kind of gotten an average from what most people recommend. And it's around 4 cans of fruit, could be dehydrated or freeze-dried. And they are nice. Raisins give a lot of options and nutrition. Bananas, dehydrated bananas are good. And dehydrated apples are good. The strawberries, the berries are almost always freeze-dried, but they're reasonably priced. Okay, here we go. Next is vegetables. Vegetables, I had 6 to 8 number 10 cans, and again, they can be freeze-dried or dehydrated. Maybe it's time for lunch, huh? Well, that's all right. You have your sheet there, and I have mine too, but I can't read it because the print's too small. I have that vegetable stew blend. I have that hearty vegetable soup mix that I'd mentioned to you earlier. And both of those are excellent products. And I like those blends just because of the variety that it offers. And then there are other, whatever you prefer. One thing Terry has mentioned that is also a nice thing if you're a potato eater. Potato flakes or potato dices or whatever give a lot of options too. And they're kind of a comfort food. There we go. Good. Thank you. Something else you'll see is a refried bean powder, which you can make your own, but you can also buy it, and that's a nice thing. And tomato powder, and in that you just add a little water, and you have like a tomato paste or tomato sauce. Okay, and then a few baking essentials. Oh, I went too fast on that one. All right. On these, you may want a smaller 2.5 size can, and definitely include spices. And whole egg powder is something else that is out there. I always recommend saving or doing some sort of, it may not be the regular chicken or beef bouillon, but some sort of a chicken beef base. And then buy locally spices and vinegar. Okay, a couple more. We have comfort foods. Yes, they are important. Think what yours are and save a few. And then the tips, I've listed here, things I've talked about before. So the other thing I want to leave you with then is think about how you're going to use those foods you have stored. Even if you did something like this, even if you followed these directions, and on this I went through, and even if there are products here you like and you would want, all the information's there on them. But even if you took this and you went home with this exact list and you stored it away and you never used it, you would wake up one day angry with me because you would say, you know, what am I going to do with it? You've got to incorporate things and you've got to personalize things for your own family. And look at what is available to you already, build with that, and then supplement with the other things that may not be as readily available to you. Now, if you are one of those that it needs to go beyond this, you have more questions, you want to think bigger scale, this afternoon, Terry's going to hit some of the, wait till after that and find out what he tells you. He'll have some things on food storage that will be real helpful to you too. But then this afternoon, I'm planning to go into this whole thing on longer term. And then in the process of putting all this together, the other thing I did kind of for Prepare the Way is put in a collection of recipes. And this isn't glitzy or anything, but these are a lot of, there are around 90 recipes in there that I have used consistently with following my method, which is using stored foods along with garden foods. So you find things that are using the stored, primarily the grains and those long-term storage foods, where you combine the storage foods along with things that are readily available fresh. No exotic ingredients. They have to be things that have multiple cooking methods, because another thing I've seen is the instructions for so many of the cooking with stored foods assume like you've got an oven. Well, you may not, you probably won't have an oven. So you've got to have foods that are really versatile. You're not going to be making cakes and, broccoli cheese casseroles and things like that, or crepes with, blueberry sauce. Well, you might pull that off. Maybe your pancakes with blueberry sauce. But you've got to have simpler, more real cooking options. So that's how this was developed, things that are built around those things. So if that's something that's interesting to you too, I can talk to you more about that or answer questions, and it's available out there if you have need of that. And then I will be highlighting also this afternoon some just more creative ways to use food storage, just some brainstorming on this is what you can do with this. So anyway, thank you very much.